This is the Personal Finance Show.
Hi, I'm Bo Humphreys, and this is the Personal Finance Show. When someone mentions income taxes, do you get excited or are you filled with dread? Do you wait until the last possible moment to file your taxes? When you finally start the process, are you so on edge that if the slightest thing goes wrong, you want to throw your laptop across the room? And when it's over, are you 100% sure that you messed it up somehow? If this sounds like you should probably check out SimpleTax. Allison Suter is a former tax lawyer. She's a total tax nerd. One day she was doing her taxes online and started wondering, why is preparing my tax return so complicated? And why is tax software so slow and expensive? If a tax nerd like Allison thinks it's complicated, what hope is there for the rest of us? Luckily for us, Allison and her co-founders decided to build what they like to call the best tax software in Canada. Allison joined me from Vancouver to talk about how she went from tax lawyer to world traveler to wedding photographer and finally to SimpleTax.
So I actually started my personal finance journey when I was really young. My grandparents used to give us some amount of money that I don't even remember now, maybe $20 for birthdays and Christmas gifts. And I remember my dad saying, you should open a bank account because you'll earn interest. And this was in the early 80s when interest was still fairly meaningful. You know, we were looking at like 15 to 18% interest rates on a savings account at Canada Trust.
And how young would you be at this point?
6, maybe?
You should open a bank account, 6-year-old.
Really young. So I remember walking into Canada Trust.
Really?
It wasn't TD Canada Trust yet. It was like Canada Trust back then.
Yeah, it was still just Canada Trust. Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I walked into the branch of Canada Trust with my dad, set up this bank account and do you remember those passbooks you used to have?
I do. I feel like we're similar in age, you and I.
Right, yeah. So I was born in 82.
Okay, 80 here. So
yeah, so very, very similar. So you used to have the bank passbooks, right?
Yep.
And so I deposited my money and I was like, this is kind of weird, Dad. And then next month, he took me to those machines that I think you still did it at the teller at first. So you'd go to the teller and they'd print out your updated bank balance.
The new sheet or... Yeah.
And my bank account now had $21 in it. And I was like...
Wait, already? Wait,
right.
Did you say 1 month or how?
Yeah. Because this was the 80s when interest was like... Right?
Like, I don't know if anyone knows that interest actually meant something.
Yeah. So there was like 15, maybe 17, 18. I don't know. I was 6. I don't remember the percent. But, we're talking in the teens,
it's
right?
high there. Yeah.
So it was such a great savings message when I was really young because I all of a sudden had more money from not doing anything.
It's a great feeling, isn't it? It's such a great feeling. Money from nothing.
And it's right. And you're like, what have I done here except for just kind of waited a little bit of time? And so I think that really set the tone for me for the rest of my life. I kind of grew up in,
wow.
There wasn't like a lot of consumption in my family. We didn't get like tons and tons of presents. We'd get like a big gift at Christmas and a big gift at our birthday, but like not stuff all year long.
Piles of presents under the tree and
yeah. So I grew up in a very moderate consumption home, I would say. So I would just sort of used to not buying lots of stuff and then kind of being 6 and realizing that my money could grow.
I don't remember anything from when I was 6. So this is
I really don't remember much. I don't remember much except for that bank balance.
That.
And so I've been interested in finance like since I was a kid.
Well, when did you start making money other than grandparent money?
My dad was self-employed. And so I think when I was about 13 or 14, I would do some summer projects for his company and make some sort of token hourly rate. They probably paid me minimum wage to do projects around the office.
Sure. Where did the money go?
Into my bank account.
And to grow.
Yeah.
Well, this is years later.
You know what?
The
Actually, that's not
90s.
true. I bought, and so it wasn't growing like quite as fast. I did buy like one fleecy pair of blue pants that cost $100, and this was in the 90s, and that was like a lot of money.
Your parents would not spring for that, but it's your
Yeah.
money, so you could do it with that money.
Yeah, and I loved those pants. Like they were fleecy and blue, and I wore them out in public all the time, but like that was my big splurge.
So fleecy pants.
Yeah, and I'm just kind of a saver by nature. Like I haven't gone through lots of spending sprees except when I started to travel when I was a little bit older.
Sure, but you had the money at that point, I'm guessing.
Right, yeah. So I basically, my first job was kind of odd jobs for my dad's work. Then I worked at Tim Hortons for a year or two.
I think that's like a true Canadian if you've worked at Tim Hortons.
Oh yeah, for sure. And
permanent residency for forever, right?
Yeah, and it was a really good introduction to like working pretty hard for minimum wage, and like it's a slog. Like it's really tough, and you're working and I was like, man, like this is tough. Like I want to do something that I can scale. I didn't know the word scale at that point, right?
But you were thinking something along those lines?
Yeah, there was some sort of vague idea like, where it's way harder to do, right? Like it's just harder.
A lot of hard work, and you're right. There's no, I mean, you could move up in the management level if you wanted, but you were thinking at that time, this probably isn't a career for me.
Yeah, school was next, and I did a finance degree. You're probably not all that surprised to hear that.
What, like just a general finance or?
So I did a bilingual Bachelor of Commerce with a major in finance.
Nice. And finance in this definition would be like derivatives and stuff like that, no?
That is exactly it. So it was much more technical finance. Like I think a traditional career path coming out of that would maybe be banking.
Or being on the brokerage floor.
That's right.
Or in the back office to start, I guess, doing research for traders.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, or selling mutual funds if you want to go to traditional personal finance.
Right, absolutely. So kind of anything like that. And then I ended up after, I think it was my third year, it was either after my second year or my third year, I got a job for a small local finance company in Edmonton that sold investment. It sold mortgages and then had investors invest in the mortgages.
Okay.
And they were higher risk mortgages.
Sure.
So you got higher rates of returns. And so it was kind of these very like basic securities, a very specialized business. And I ended up doing that at that company. It was a very small company, so I could kind of do a bunch of different projects there. And one of the things I liked most that summer was working on, it was a small business. There's a tax deduction called the capital gains deduction for small businesses. Basically, if you earn, at that time it was up to $750,000 on gains on the share of your qualified small business corporation shares, those would be tax-free. I was working on a tax project and I was like, this is really interesting. I actually like this more than anything I've done in school, than anything else I've done at this company. Like this is really interesting.
It's funny how we're drawn to certain things that are stereotypically not interesting at all.
Right. Like that description probably did not sell the interesting factor of tax. And then I was reading a lot of legislation and I was like, I think this is actually law. Like, I think what this is the law. You know, I'm in my early 20s at this point. I don't know what's business or what's law or whatever. So I figured out that was a legal problem, not a business problem. And I thought, I should probably go to law school.
I got to go to law school to learn about tax law?
No, and you know what? It wasn't even to learn about tax law specifically at that time. It was
to help
to learn about the law, because I was like, this is more interesting. Doing this problem, like the problem solving, like the process that was involved in working on this problem was more interesting to me than anything I had done. And so I didn't even intend on ending up in tax when I went to law school. So I can't say it's a huge surprise that I did end up here.
Because you were drawn to the tax part of it.
I was young too, and I didn't know I was ready to be an adult yet. So It was maybe like, ooh, this problem is interesting. I think this is a legal problem. I should go to law school and defer growing up for a little while.
Okay, so that was you must also enjoy school. I'm guessing.
I do enjoy school.
Yeah, it's that's one of the main things. You have to like school to want to go do post-grad stuff, because there's a lot of people who would be like, yeah, maybe I should, but I can't possibly sit in a classroom or do tests or exams like ever.
Right. And law school is like really school. Like it is very traditional school. It's not like, it's like writing and exams and the Socratic method with teachers asking you questions in these long classes. Like it's school. Yeah. So I did that, and I actually ended up doing my summer articles in a tax law firm by coincidence. Like
So you didn't even choose it. Wow.
I didn't seek them out. My professor, who I was fairly close with, her husband was a partner at a tax law firm. And she said, I think you'd get along with my husband, and I think you'd like this kind of work. And I was like, well, isn't that interesting, Sharon? Because this is actually why I came to law school in the first place.
It seems like it was like meant to be.
Yeah, it was a bit serendipitous, I think. So I ended up doing my summer articles in a tax firm in Vancouver, and then taking a year off after I graduated. I actually took a year off to travel. That finance company that I had worked for before going to law school, I had rebuilt a system for them using Microsoft Access. They used to manage a bunch of documents in spreadsheets, and I thought that wasn't very efficient.
You got database skills too.
Yeah, so I had some database skills, and so I had ended up earning a fairly substantial bonus from that company between doing my undergrad and going to law school while I was working at the finance company. So I had a little bit of money that I had still saved, even like through all of law school. So I was able to spend a year traveling without incurring too much debt.
And how did you pay for school?
Undergrad was scholarships and
okay.
RESPs, and then I still had some RESPs left.
So your parents started early with the RESPs.
Yeah, like I'm very, very lucky to come from a saving family, right?
Because you hear like about RESPs now, like people are putting stuff in, but I don't remember a lot of it from the 80s.
Yeah, I think it was pretty unusual back then.
That's great.
So I had tuition assistance from either scholarships or my parents throughout. So it changes everything. Like, I mean, if you can graduate from law school, like if you can graduate from a professional designation without debt, like that just,
that's the
it
dream.
Changes everything. And so I'm really lucky to have been in that position.
It gave you freedom, right?
It gave me like time to go travel, and then the ability to start saving right when I started working.
Right away. The money is yours.
So
this is so foreign to most people that you didn't have the grind. I got to start doing this now because of the interest that's accruing on all this stuff.
Right. Like it's just this totally different scenario. So I appreciate that that's a bit unusual and it's not that helpful. Like, hey, I was in this lucky situation, but I was in that lucky situation. So I was able to.
What it says is that this is possible, right? People think that these kinds of things don't exist, and that's why we need to hear about it. Hey, parents, start the RESPs now. Yeah,
and do it. And I mean, like, unsurprisingly, we've got them for our kids because it changes. I think it can really change your kid's life.
Yeah, well, it's just not, it's a nice thing because you're not handing them money to pay for school. It's been building. It's their money. You gave it to them as they went along. It's like getting a birthday gift but putting it away.
And RESPs too. Like right now, the bonuses you get from the government are crazy. Like the government gives you, if you're able to max out your RESPs, you get like $500 free from the government every year into your kid's RESP as well, which is.
What is that, the Canada Education Savings Grant?
Yeah, it is. And then also, if you are lower income, there's an additional one, which I think it's related. It's got another name, but they'll give you even more money into your kids' RESP. So if like somehow you can get money into those, it's like it's such a great thing to do for your kids if you can do it.
Just do it, right? Whatever the minimum you need to get that 500 bonus, even.
Yeah.
So you did your travel. Where'd you go after law school?
Around the world.
You did a round the world trip?
Yep. So
Nice.
we first drove across the country in a rental car, which was kind of fun. I've never done that before. So we drove from Vancouver to Ottawa. And then we set off on our trip. We started in the Middle East and went to Dubai and then to Jordan. And then we flew to Turkey and went to Greece and up along like through Albania, which was pretty unusual at that time. It was really, really interesting. And it was beautiful. And there was like no tourists. So that was really neat.
Yeah.
And then we went to Africa and we did overland through South Africa all the way up through Southern and Eastern Africa.
Nice. We were just in Kenya last November.
Yeah, I loved Kenya. So Kenya was the last stop we did. So we started in South Africa and then we did South Africa, like a self-drive tour ourselves, including a self-drive safari.
Nice.
Which was
which you can do in South Africa.
Yeah. So, and it was like, you could do it on such a budget. Like safaris are so expensive and we were able to do it for like a 10th or maybe a 15th the cost. It was a really, and fun too, like a fun way to do this self-drive safari.
And you felt safe because we picked Kenya because it was the cheapest of the safari options for us. But there were situations where if we were by ourselves, we wouldn't have survived.
Yeah. We...
You're resourceful?
I think we were maybe young, also young.
Yeah.
And things feel a little less scary when you're young, because I think looking back, there's a lot of situations we probably shouldn't have made it through.
Yeah.
Like I think it's a common thing to do in South Africa, the self-drive safari.
It is, eh?
Like it's set up for it, and there's camps. Like you can't just camp anywhere. You've got to go into the camps at the end of the day, gate you in. And they're pretty strict. I think if they catch you wandering around a lion, they're like out. Doesn't matter that you've paid the entry fee, like you're out.
You're done.
Then we went through Namibia and Botswana and into Zimbabwe to Victoria Falls.
Nice.
And that was the time of like crazy inflation in Zimbabwe. So there was these like $100,000 bills floating around on the street because they were worthless.
Yeah.
So it was just kind of interesting because they like literally were like 100,000 bills floating around. So that was really fun. And then we did a short one of those overland tours for that part from South Africa up through Zimbabwe. And then after that, we did the rest of Africa on our own again. And that was a bus adventure through Zambia. And that was a bus adventure through Zambia. Like it was an adventure.
You covered a lot of countries and we're not even at Kenya yet.
Yeah, and we were moving a lot. Like it was really about the adventure and the journey. Like I think that was a lot more. Like I've kind of evolved into preferring a slower form of travel and getting a house and staying somewhere for a month if I can.
Sure.
But at that time it was like, all right, we've been here for a day. Like let's go see somewhere new. So we were just moving constantly for basically a year. So yeah, up through like Eastern,
a whole year.
Africa.
This is how long this trip was for you.
Yeah, it was one whole year.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah, it was really, really cool.
Sorry, ECS, up through East Africa and after Zambia or
Tanzania.
And then
briefly. We didn't have a lot of stops, and then we went through Kenya to Uganda, spent quite a bit of time in Uganda, and then came back to Kenya on our way out of Africa. And so we went to Japan for a month, and then we were in Australia for about a month, New Zealand for about a month. South America, we did Machu Picchu in Peru and a few other stops in Peru. And like it's just so neat, like it's so interesting. And then we went through Bolivia and did the salt flats. Like I don't know if anybody's seen pictures of the salt flats, but that's really, really cool. It was pretty crazy. We got to see so much, but also realize like just how big the world is and just how even though we were moving so fast and like making so many stops, we saw so little. And I think that really sparked a passion for both my husband and I, and a real priority in our life to figure out how we can travel and work as well at the same time.
It's the dream, right? That everybody has, but then everyone's like, well, I got to get a job and I only get 2 or 3 or 4 weeks vacation if I'm lucky. Did that set the mood of what you wanted to do when you got back?
Yeah, well, so what happens is you need to article once you finish law school. So I had deferred my articles for this year so that we could take off the year.
Okay.
I figured it would be easier to start working and not leave after I articled. You know what I mean? Like it would be easier to
of
take
course.
this
The
time off
continuity of the
before.
job or yeah.
Yeah. And then I was really, really lucky that I was able to have a job when I got back, because I was gone between 2008 and 2009. And that was when there was the huge crash.
Yep.
So the fact that my firm was even able to hire me in 2009, like, I was really lucky.
That's lucky.
And I don't actually know how that worked out. I think maybe they just needed a junior. There wasn't a lot of juniors in my firm, and they just maybe needed another body to do some of the more simple tasks.
Yeah.
Because I really shouldn't have been able to start articling in 2009. Like, that was a tough year.
Well, and you're lucky
and so then
that your money was because I'm sure you were getting into the
yeah,
savings at this point. And
it was pretty much depleted at that point. So I had been
Yeah.
counting on having this job.
Sure. Okay.
And luckily I did have the job. And I realized really quickly, probably the stark contrast of having been traveling and then going and working in an office every day. I was like, oh man, I don't know that this is my story. Like, I'm not sure that this is
Yeah.
what I want to be doing my whole life. Like, I'm basically living the dream. I'm articling at a boutique tax firm, and this, like, we had moved to Toronto by this point, in this like fancy office in Toronto, and I'm not really that happy. Like, crap, what am I gonna do?
Yeah. It just took you a year?
Well, it took a couple of years.
Okay.
After about a year, I started dabbling, I would say at that time, in photography. We had done a lot of photography on our trip around the world. We had kind of splurged on a camera before we left. And so I'd learned the basics of photography while we were traveling. And so then I kind of started dabbling in wedding photography, because that was at the very beginning of when, like, everybody and their dog was becoming a photographer. And I was like, this is a way to live my dream. Like, I can have this business and it's like so glamorous. I'll be doing weddings all the time.
And before
and
that,
so
you weren't like a photographer before, like when you were in school, or?
Not at all. No, I'd always had a camera. Like, that was one of the first things I bought. That was one of the first splurges I had ever bought when I was a teenager. I'd bought myself a camera, but never an SLR. Like, that was new for our around the world.
We had that for our honeymoon too. It was definitely new, and there's a big difference when you understand how to frame photos and all those other
right? Like, you're learning about exposure, and you're learning about composition, and even like exposure. There's perfect exposure, but then sometimes stylistically you don't want your exposure to be perfect, right? So I kind of learned about that while we were traveling, and then started shooting for free when we got back.
Okay, so you are doing photography on the side, still articling, but not really feeling it.
Yeah, and it was a really weird time, because I had this great job, and my principal, so that's the senior lawyer who you work for when you're an articling student, he was this really prestigious tax lawyer who was wonderful. And we have, even still, all these years later, a wonderful relationship, like such a great rapport. And he was so great to learn from. So everything on paper looked like it was perfect.
I know the feeling. Yeah. It doesn't mean that you can't explore what you really want, though.
Yeah. But, you have this like sense of unease, of like, this just doesn't feel like what I want to do. And it's probably that millennial feeling that everybody always talks about, right? Like, I kind of attribute it to being an early millennial, and just thinking like, I'm going to craft myself the life that I want.
Well, you should. I mean, I'm kind of on the cusp with you of the millennial world, but I think everybody should. You don't just stick with something because you have a law degree, and because that's the thing that you chose once in your life.
Absolutely.
You're allowed to change. It doesn't matter. This is all in the past.
Absolutely. And I think what was helpful for me, and this statistic could be totally incorrect, but I have this vague recollection of, my dad is an industrial psychologist. So that means he's like a psychologist for the workplace, basically.
Yeah, wow.
And I remember him telling me something when I was pretty young. And I think he told me, like, at that time, people changed careers on average of 7 times. And that might mean like changing your role within your workplace. Like, it didn't necessarily mean these huge shifts that we're talking about, but that's always really stuck with me. So whenever I've wanted to make a change, I'm like, oh yeah, man, like, I'm not anywhere close to 7 yet.
Did you know that it's 15 now?
That doesn't surprise me at all.
I was at a presentation where a guy put the number up and asked people to guess what it was. And he said, this is the amount of times you, if you're starting now, are going to change.
That's
jobs.
so interesting. And you know what? Because I remember thinking like, man, 7 seems really high back then.
Yeah, it does,
now
right?
people change their jobs way more frequently.
Because it was 1.
So,
at one point, it was 1, and that's it.
right.
And then you die, right? Or retire, sorry.
Yeah. Well, you retire if you're lucky.
If you're
Back
lucky.
then, maybe not.
Yeah, maybe
right?
earlier.
Life
Yeah, you do work till you
longer
die.
now too.
So, okay, you had this 7. Yeah, that's good because you're like, wow, this is my first one, sort of, out of school, right?
Yeah, so that was my first like really big career shift, or thinking, like, it's okay if I'm not happy. Like maybe I haven't found the career that I'm gonna want to stick with yet.
You still got time.
Yeah, I've got time. I guess that was number 2 because the finance, kind of the quickly abandoned finance career was number 1.
Well, we count Tim Hortons as number 1.
Oh yeah, that's true.
But I'm
I
counting.
don't even want to start counting.
I'm counting. Yeah, I think you count after your like school. After school is done, then you can start counting. Because before that, it's just you are still trying to figure it out, maybe. But the point is, we never stop trying to figure it out. And so you decided to do photography.
Yeah, so I decided after about a year of kind of doing this for free, which is not something I would recommend to anybody. Like never do anything for free. But
No.
there I was, a little bit younger. Young and green and thinking this was a great way to get started.
You can start if you have a couple of gigs. You got to get somebody to give you a review to start.
Totally.
So
yeah.
giving a little bit away for free is fine, but not for a long time, hopefully.
Not for doing it for too long. I think I did it for too long, and then I ended up with this kind of clientele that I wasn't my ideal clientele. Like it wasn't the people who were paying for weddings. It was the people who were
value.
trying to
Yeah.
free. And so, but somehow I worked my way through second shooting gigs where I would work at a pretty low hourly rate for being able to use a handful of my images, getting some more of the weddings that I wanted to shoot with the clients who would pay. And then after a few years of practicing law, I had enough of a wedding business built up that I thought, I could leave and sort of eat ramen for a couple of years and try to really make this photography thing work. Like that was, I had enough money that I could pay my rent, and enough money coming in that I could kind of pay for the basics.
But no money for savings. Was that a hard decision?
And a little bit of savings actually.
A tiny bit.
Yeah, and so we had my husband and I both had pretty good jobs when we were working in Toronto, and I think we both felt this growing sense of unease about like both of our careers. So we both kind of saving as much as we could. We didn't live the like high flying Toronto lifestyle, even though we had these fancy jobs. We were very, very frugal. So we had a bit of a runway. I remember thinking like, if we don't have any income come in, we can last for 6 or 7 months or something. But you know what the difference was too? I had some weddings lined up already, like that I hadn't accounted for in my savings. So I was like, this business is already working. So like, this is the savings runway. This isn't the savings plus earnings. So left my job to become a wedding photographer.
Not the typical story.
No.
Especially leaving a job to become a photographer, fine. Leaving a job as a tax lawyer or a lawyer in this case. You were working in tax, right, at this point?
I was, yeah. So I was an international corporate tax lawyer turned wedding photographer.
And so how long did you stay just as a photographer?
Not very long, and not intentionally either. So SimpleTax happened out of frustration. So I left my job in December 2011.
Okay.
And then when we were filing our returns in probably March or April of 2012.
Hoping for that big refund because...
Right, because we'd like to use that. We'd like to add that money to our runway, right?
That's right, exactly.
We kind of looked at each other and we were like, man, like tax software is really shitty. It's just not very good. It's confusing and cumbersome and slow and expensive, and it makes it seem like tax returns are hard, which like personal tax returns for the vast majority of the population really aren't that hard.
Pretty straightforward.
And I mean, even if you're a sole proprietor, like your bookkeeping is the hard part. Your tax return is not hard.
That's right.
Like,
You just plug it into the T2125 and you're good, right?
Right. And you like move along your merry way. So we got to thinking like, this is way too hard. And my husband was a product manager in his former career. I was a former tax lawyer, and barely even former at this point. We're talking like 4 or 5 months. And a friend of ours was a video game developer who had just left his job wanting to get into web software.
Okay.
And so the three of us all kind of looked at each other, and John and Justin were like, definitely we're going to need to do this full time, but like, this is tax software. We'll probably need a half-time tax person. And I agreed to this. I was like, oh yeah, half-time for tax software. That makes sense. So I initially joined on kind of like part-time so I could still do wedding photography, which I was really digging. Like it was really, really fun.
So you were like
but then it turns
founder, but mostly consultant about the tax aspects of it.
Yeah. So for the first couple of months, I was totally like working half the time with those guys, and then I'd work with them, like near them, while I was editing and processing.
They could ask you questions, and yeah, okay.
Yeah,
sure.
And we realized, though, probably 6 months in, that like when you write tax software, you can't have a half-time tax person. You actually need to have.
It's really complicated stuff. Like filing the return is simple, but the calculations that go into it are not.
Absolutely. And so we were able to kind of restructure our business so that I was an equal partner. And we were like, probably time in from the beginning is, so we were able to kind of restructure so that we were all equal owners, equal co-founders.
Okay.
And it was, we financed our business with $1,200. That was our capital that went into SimpleTax. It was $400 each. It was initially $1,000, but then when we had to restructure everything, it became $1,200.
Was that just for incorporation?
Yeah. But that was also all of the money that we put into the company.
Well, I guess at this point, it's just human capital that you're dealing with mostly, right?
That's great. And for software, and we all had computers, so we were all using our own computers and our own monitor, right? Like, so it was really just, we'd need to spend $50 on this filing or $100 on that, but like it was $1,200 was how much we started the company with. And and so then it became full time very quickly. I was like, this is an awful lot of work, and we got certified. So the CRA certification process is an annual thing you have to go through to ensure your calculations are accurate.
No matter how long you've been doing this.
No matter how long you've been doing it. Yeah, the first one is crazy. Like it's insane.
It seems hard to get in, right? Because at this point, what year is this? Your first time trying to get certified?
We were getting certified throughout like the 2012 calendar year for the 2012 tax year.
Okay. So it took that whole time, then they would certify you by what, January of the next year?
So the certification process runs from about November is when it starts.
Yeah.
And then they try to certify people for when tax season opens, which used to be in early February. Now it's in late February. But they would close the CRA certification process at the end of March. So basically, if you hadn't passed by the end of March, you were out for the year. And we actually ended up getting certified on March 5th of 2013.
Wow.
Which was actually quite early for a new player. Like we had missed a month of tax season, but like the fact that we did it in our first year, the CRA was actually pretty astounded. They said we were one of the first companies to ever have done it on our first try.
And what was your secret? Because so how many players?
Hours and 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 hours of work, like nonstop work.
But how do you know? Like, how were you just did a lot of testing to make sure that it was perfect, like that you were covering all the bases? How does the CRA know that you're good to go?
So there's two sort of things that happen when you're getting certified. There's a round of test cases to make sure that every other product and the CRA all have the same results. So it's actually kind of a symbiotic relationship. Like every year we find problems in theirs and they find problems in ours, and kind of by the end of that first phase, everyone's confident that everyone's calculating correctly. And then the second phase is they take your software and they run it through 2,600 individual tests.
Okay.
And you get a maximum of 5 versions. And if you don't pass like 100% of the tests by version 5, you're out.
So what was your process?
We did it in 3 in our first year.
3. Wow.
Yeah.
And so they would come back after the first and second test and say, tweak this or tweak that, or did you have to figure it out yourself?
They would say, these are the ones you failed. And so then you'd have to figure out why you failed. So it's not a bad process. It was usually they say you failed. And if you didn't understand, you could call in and talk to a human, and the human would say, this is why you failed.
Can you give us an example of is there one that's like easy to talk about that you failed and you fixed, like something that you just missed the first time around?
I can't remember any of the ones that we would have failed. Oh, actually, yeah, there was a really good example from the following year. They changed a bunch of rules for seniors who are still working but are also collecting CPP.
Yeah.
And one rule would be, let's say you filed a form to not pay into the CPP, but then you wanted to revoke it. If the software allowed a revocation that was before the election, you would fail.
Yeah.
So we failed that.
Okay. And then this is a perfect example of how complicated the whole thing is.
Right.
That's just one tiny bit.
Right. Like, and it doesn't, and honestly, like, I think if you're using our app on the front end, it feels extremely simple.
Oh yeah. It's
you
all
have
simple.
No idea what's happening.
But it's just the app, your software has to know who I am, what I'm doing, all this stuff, and work with, I mean, I don't know how many permutations of Canadian taxpayers there are, but there's a lot, right? Or do you know?
Oh, man. Oh, God. Millions and millions and millions. I feel like almost everyone could be.
Everyone could be totally different. Well done.
Thanks. So it was really, really exciting to be out there. And then our second problem, I guess the first one wasn't a problem. It was just tough to get certified. But the second thing became a marketing problem. We're like, we've spent all of this time and like the opportunity cost of the three of us working on this for almost an entire year, like nonstop at this point, was really high. And like, how are people even going to find out about us? And then even if they know, like, why are they going to switch? Like, why would they trust their tax return to some software company they've never heard of before?
NetFile certification's not like a golden ticket. Like it doesn't like bring you a certain amount of people.
It is, and it does. The CRA has a certified software page that people go to, and it gets randomly sorted. So every once in a while, you'll end up on the top of that list.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
But it was kind of like, if that was our only source of users, and not every Canadian goes to the NetFile CRA groups, right?
So that wasn't
like,
doing the trick for you.
That page either.
That wasn't giving you the amount of business right off the bat that you needed.
Right. And so we were like, how are people going to find out about us? And then randomly, Rob Carrick heard about our product. I'm not sure how. He's a financial journalist for the Globe and Mail.
Yep.
I'm not sure how he heard about us, but we got a call from him one day, and he was asking about our product. And he's like, that sounds really interesting, but like it's a bit of a snooze, guys. Like a better UI and a better UX, and it's simple and it's beautiful and it's fast. Like, okay, call me back if you have something interesting to say. and we were like, what if we make this free? Was that what we first thought? And then we're like, we can't do that. We need to eat. What if we make this pay what you want, including zero? So we called back Rob Carrick and we're like, this is how we're going to monetize our product. We're not going to charge unless people decide they want to pay. And he was like, well, that's interesting. And then wrote about us in the newspaper almost the very next day. So we couldn't backtrack from that decision very easily.
Well, why would you even have that idea? Was there another example of other software as a service products like that would be, free if you're a lower income or can't afford it?
So a lot of our competitors have free offerings below a certain income threshold.
Yeah, okay.
So they would be, let's say your family income is below $20,000, it's free. Otherwise, you're paying $45.99. Like, that's not really. If your family income is under $20,000, you should probably be paying zero.
Yeah.
Or if your family income is under $30,000, which is below the cutoff, you should still probably be paying zero. And so we thought that this would give you a chance to decide, could you afford to throw us a few bucks? Could you afford to throw us a whole bunch of bucks if you were in that position and you found that we made your life easier, a little bit more pleasant? We find our software, I like to say it's a little bit irreverent, like it's a little bit funny as you're going through if you're reading slowly.
I'd give it a little try. I mean, I signed up. I'm gonna do a parallel. Unfortunately, I'm sorry. Last year I got an email and I already paid for your competitor.
No worries.
But that's because I've been with them for years. But I'm going to do a parallel because just as you said, if I don't want to pay for it, I won't. right?
Right.
I don't have to. So it's not like I'm like, oh, well, I don't want to spend another $15 just to try this. That's a really great way for people to say, is this just the same or better? Or do I like it better? Is it more fun? Is it more... I like the dialogue boxes is what I was going to say. Like, hey, but, the next page is loading, you're awesome, or whatever you put. Right?
Yeah, we're like trying to make it like a little bit friendly.
I like that.
And personal touches. We've got some personal touches. I like to think throughout. Some sections are a little more personal than other, but it's fun. And what was really cool is once we were published in the newspaper, I think it gave us a little bit of street cred. So people became less nervous about using this. Somehow the newspaper was more beneficial to us than the CRA website for just people trusting it a little bit more. We could then put it on our website that we were featured in the Globe and Mail, and then a local interest tech writer here in Vancouver wrote about us. So we got a ton of local users, and then we just try to seed it through our friends and family, and people used our product. Like, people came and people actually were paying, which is really unbelievable. Like, not a huge percentage, but
you give them options, right?
Yeah. And we were giving like a range of options that you can choose. You can also choose any amount. There's a box at the end that, let's say you're like, I really like this, but I literally have $2.
Yeah,
like, I can give you $2.
$2.
You can give us $2. I think that one of our processors has a minimum of $2, so I think you can't give us $1, but you can give us $2 if you've got it.
So I'm gonna play devil's advocate for a sec and say, well, isn't there value for going to like a tax preparer person to go and sit through your taxes and do it?
I think for the vast majority of Canadians, the answer is no.
Like, they're not really adding any value because for most Canadians, it's so simple in terms of you have a T4.
Right. Yeah. And the other thing, and this is something we think a lot about tax. Like, your tax return isn't tax planning. It's not setting you up to remember to save all your receipts all year long. Like, if you don't save your bus pass receipts, you can't claim the credit.
That's true, isn't it? It's really, it's a result. Yeah.
It's about learning in advance. And so interestingly, we haven't had an interview. We sort of targeted our software to paper switchers initially, switchers, or people who just wanted to do it super, super fast. And in 2017, like on version 5, we actually added in an interview. So for people who really like to go through 100 questions and tick off every box just to make sure they're not missing anything.
Oh yeah, like the bus.
We have that
bus
this year
or whatever. I want to make sure I check that off, or maybe I am from Northern Ontario. I don't remember. So, I should check that.
Yeah, in all our prior versions, we had like a checklist version of it, but this is the first year we've added questions, which I think some people have been looking for. Like, it's feedback we've got every year for the last 5 years, and so I'm really excited to see how that impacts people who are more nervous. I felt like we lost some of the more nervous people in prior years because they were worried they were missing something.
Sure.
And now we've got a really good way to answer that question. And there's no charge to use that. Like, you get our full software, and it's the same payment model no matter what way you use our software. You can have the most complicated tax return in the whole country.
Yeah.
And you can pay $0 if you've decided that you didn't really like it and it wasn't worth it to you.
Well, and the net file certification tells everybody that any Canadian can use this.
That's right.
If you're an individual.
That's right. Yeah. There's a handful of limitations. Pre-bankruptcy, we can't support. That's an e-file, so you have to go to a tax preparer for a pre-bankruptcy return. And emigration. So if you move away from the country in the year, we can't support that.
And these are very small percentages of people. And really anyone who, I'm going to say, if you have any kind of a odd situation, definitely consult. I mean, would you even say these people should be consulting with tax lawyers?
Yeah, or an accountant.
Yeah, or a certified accountant. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a little bit down on tax preparers, but I really, really believe that some people need accountants, or tax experts, like someone who has taken more than maybe just the one-off course to do tax returns. People who are tax experts are definitely pre-bankruptcy. Emigration is really complicated.
It probably depends on where you're moving to as well.
It matters less from a Canadian tax perspective, but you've got all the immigration stuff on that side. But you have a deemed disposition of all of your assets at the time you leave the country.
Even if you're leaving assets? Or does emigration specifically mean you're getting rid of everything?
No, it deems you to have disposed of them. So let's say you have investments.
Yep.
Even if you don't move those accounts, even if you leave those accounts in
You have
Canada,
to pay the tax.
yeah, you
Of
pay the
course.
tax at that
Okay.
time.
Yeah. Wow. It's like
So
dying. Or
yeah, it's a
from
little bit. That's how the CRA and the Department of Finance treat it. They
from
treat
the
it. They
government's
treat it as if you
perspective,
died.
you're dead to them. You're
Yeah,
done.
they want their money and they want it now. So those two are
Wow.
actually
Of
complicated. So I
course,
kind of
yeah.
agree with them being e-file, which is tax preparer specific.
And of course, if you, corporate taxes and all that kind of stuff, anything that
Yeah.
requires a different kind of tax return, that's a completely different
Right.
thing. There's other services for that.
Small businesses can use our product. Absolutely. Like rental income, Airbnb income, like any kind of gig economy income.
Yeah, any sole proprietor or partnership stuff.
Yeah,
that
and like
should
we
be
were saying
fine.
before, if you're doing your bookkeeping, like your taxes are a breeze. It's the bookkeeping that's more complicated in my view. It's keeping up with your records throughout the year, right?
That's right. You don't need a tax helper for that. You need a bookkeeper and perhaps an accountant to
Right.
to ask the harder questions.
Absolutely.
And yeah, that's a completely different thing. And then because once you get to you guys, everybody should have everything in order, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then another thing that's happened that's made preparing tax returns way easier than it has ever been before is 2 years ago, the CRA introduced a service called Autofill My Return.
Yes, I love it.
So it's so cool. Like you basically hook into My Account. So if you don't have CRA My Account, I highly recommend it. Like it's a really cool service.
Yeah, I'm going to second that. The fact that, because I always thought that they obviously have my T4s because they have to people file them with the government.
Yeah.
And why wasn't it connected? Like you have this net file thing, I know that they know my T4 stuff.
Right.
They knew it.
Yeah, and they do. And they now will send them
finally
to software. I love it. I think it's so cool. It's for us, there were 2 boxes on the T4 where we used to have ton of transcription errors. People would just type in the wrong value. I think they'd breeze over them or something would happen.
They're weird boxes. There's things that I don't even understand on that sheet.
Yeah, and like transcription errors have dipped so low. Like it's a great service. It saves you time.
Yeah, really great.
It's the exact values that the CRA has on file. All the boxes are getting filled out the way that they think they are. There's a few things like certain boxes we need a bit more information from you. But you can fill out a lot of your tax return using data directly from the CRA. And like a lot of people in Canada don't claim very many deductions. So they're literally like loading up the app, typing in their number, logging into My Account and clicking submit and you're done.
Really. And I mean, I know for a fact that even though the majority of Canadians are simple in terms of their taxes, still so many of them are still terrified.
Yes, terrified. People are so afraid of making a mistake. And that's what I really, that's like my pie in the sky thing that I wish I could change somehow, is this fear that people have. Because the first time you do your tax return, and we have a lot of first time tax return doers of varied ages, like 18 years old to like 75 years old, or
they just had someone else do it for them up till now.
Yeah. And they'll come in and they'll do it for the first time. And it's empowering. Like you can look at the forms, and if you're interested in math, you can kind of see where your money's going. And it's just, it gives you the opportunity to take charge. It's kind of like what you're doing too. It's giving you the chance to take charge of your personal finances a bit. And it makes you feel more confident in your whole self, I think.
Well, you're not sitting there worrying. Like you're not sitting there for months saying, "Oh, I'm gonna have to do my taxes. I'm gonna do my taxes." Same thing. Like, oh, I should. I know that I should have some insurance or max out my TFSA or RSP limits. I know that I should be doing this stuff, but I just don't know how to pull the trigger. Right.
Right. Yeah. It's really. I think it makes a difference, and we get emails every year from people who say like, man, my friend told me to do it and I sat down and did it, and I didn't think I was going to be able to finish, but here I am like an hour later, and this is their first time ever doing their tax return. Right. And they're done. They're done.
And it almost seems too easy, right? It's like, I must have missed something. I must have been doing it wrong. I must have done it wrong. Because now that the T4 gets imported, some people actually have to do nothing.
And a lot of people surprisingly have to do nothing. Like,
type your name in and your social insurance number.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. So it's really neat, and it's fun, and it's empowering, and
well, that's awesome. And of course, you're going to get net file certification again, as you have for every year, right? Since
yeah, and maybe we're really close, and I just missed that phone call.
Well, then everyone will forgive you for all the buzzes then because
Hopefully.
of that. So SimpleTax.ca.
That's right.
So SimpleTax.ca. You just register real easy, and then start typing
Yeah, and
some
you
stuff
can
in.
actually, you know what? You can use our app and get almost all the way through. If you just want to take it for a test spin without signing up for an account, you can you can dump all your numbers in.
Oh yeah, I think I noticed that. I didn't have to actually register. I mean, I did because I knew I was going to use it. But so if you just want to give it a test drive.
Totally. And you can take yourself all the way through as well. Like, you can, if you don't ever want to sign up for an account, you can submit your return, save your PDF, and call it a day, and not have an account either. We don't highly recommend that. It's easier if you ever want to kind of look at something in the future, if you've had an account, because if you do that, we don't ever save any of your data anywhere. Like, it's all on your client, and you've got your PDF, and that's it. A little bit better to save your data, then you can have some consistency year over year.
Yes.
We can do a lot of your carry forwards for you, which is really helpful.
That's one of the things. That's one of the things that with the one of your competitors that I have is that I have my what are the little things like the little capital gains things that just add up over year. Right? It's like, oh, that stuff's already there. I don't have to figure it out. But the good thing
Let me tell you something, Bo. Guess what?
What?
That comes in through autofill.
Oh, everything comes in through autofill now. Oh, that's awesome. Because I was just gonna make sure that I copied things over. But you're saying anything the CRA has, it's gonna come in through autofill.
And you'll get the list when you run autofill.
Sure.
But it's the only thing that matters to some people that isn't set up yet, and I give it a year or two, is allowable business investment losses. But that's pretty rare.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like
I feel
every
like
other,
I have like $4 in there or something. Is that?
Yeah. So
because I'm like, what is this? Why is there even a balance?
Right. It was probably on it was probably on a tax slip somewhere, like a T5 or something somewhere at some time.
I'm like, who's able, and why do I owe them money? Right?
Why they're and that's the only thing that they're not sending through yet. But every one of those other tables in CRA My Account that has a carry forward table, those all come through. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I mean, this isn't an ad for the CRA, but go open the My Account. You can, I've gone in and I revised past year taxes, like from like 5 years ago or something like that.
Yeah.
And I got more money because I forgot something or whatever. But you can see them all online. I think it's like the CRA built it, and I don't know, maybe half the people have it. I don't even know if half the people are using it.
Not half the people, and more. Like, I don't remember what the ratio is, but it's not high enough. Like, it's just a way to access the data that the government has on file for you. It's so good. Like, it's a really good resource to have.
And for changing addresses and doing stuff like that, that's important. You don't want to be like, oh, I don't have this thing, so I can't do my taxes. These are other things that are stopping us, right? The things that are enhancing the fear is, I don't know how to get I don't have my notice of assessment. Well, you don't need it if you have your login to your My Account. You ever need to find those things because they're online now. Everything's online.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad that you built this, and obviously the pay what you want option is great, especially for low income people. But if you're making a decent amount of money, at least you're going to go in there and pay for the software, right? You guys got to eat.
Yeah, and you know what? It's interesting. Like, and people do pay, and we are so grateful all the time, and like it means we're doing something right. And because we have this payment model, I think it keeps us a little bit more accountable to like continuing to build something.
Yeah.
People are going to want to pay us for, because that's where all of our money comes from. We don't have any other sources of revenue.
And if people have feedback, as you said, you get a lot of feedback. How do they give you that feedback? From within the program or email? Or?
Yeah. So we do all of our support through email, which sounds like horrible, but response times are within a couple of hours, usually during the day, during tax season. It's super, super quick to get a response. And that's where we'd like feedback as well. So you can email us. It's hello@simpletax.ca. We get feedback on Facebook. We're really active in the Reddit Personal Finance Canada subreddit, and people send us feedback through there. We get feedback on our Facebook wall, on Twitter. Like we'll listen wherever you're talking to us. We're going to listen. Like we actually listen to what our users are saying.
How many people are working for SimpleTax now?
We are now 7.
7. That's awesome. So the 3 founders, right?
Yeah, 3 founders, and then we have our next person we hired was somebody to help with customer support. So we have a customer support person he's wonderful. His name is Clint. You'll see him the first time you come to our app.
Okay.
Like he's just fantastic. And then we hired about 2 years ago, almost just under 2 years ago, we hired an additional tax resource so that we could support Quebec. So that's Carolyn. She does like all of our Quebec work. We hired Alex, he's another developer. And then just last month we hired Fumi, who is a designer, because we've actually like got to the point where we can't manage all of our own design anymore. So
nice.
It's really cool. It's like really neat. We have this business now.
And design is important. User experience is kind of the main thing.
That's our
right?
thing.
That's your thing.
That's our thing.
So yeah, that's awesome that you're investing more into that. Thanks so much for coming on the show. This was good.
Thanks so much for having me.
I don't know that people know that there's awesome options for net filing and doing your taxes online
and fun.
And fun, yeah. Now, we're both tax nerds, so taxes are always going to be fun to us. But let's just say not terrible. For those who are like, taxes can never be fun, you're obviously lying to me.
Absolutely.
But no, it's a pleasant experience. You might still feel terrified as you're going through it, but it's going to take you a couple of seconds if you have a simple return. And hopefully it'll take away that fear a little bit by bit.
I hope so. And I think it will. Like I think that we get people there.
NetFile opens up on the 26th of February. I'm going to probably put this out in the middle of February so that everybody can get the word and make their choices about when NetFile certification opens.
Fantastic. And you know what? Actually, autofill opens on February 12th. So autofill will be like ready to go before NetFile opens.
Great. So everybody can just kind of get started and get it all done, and then they'll just, when NetFile certification happens, they just press a button.
Yeah. Unless you have T3s, those usually come late. But
Okay. So you got to, we're all stuck. We got to still wait for all the banks and all the investment companies and your employer to send you all this stuff, right? So
that's right.
Don't rush into it until you're sure you have all your documents. The CRA doesn't have everything in autofill, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Allison.
No worries. Thanks again for having me.
I just checked the CRA website, and SimpleTax is now certified for your 2017 taxes. So you can go get started, but remember, the NetFile doesn't open until February 26th. And although you have the option to pay $0, please consider paying something. Next week on the Personal Finance Show, I will be talking with Jane Rooney, who is Canada's financial literacy leader within the federal government's Financial Consumer Agency of Canada. She was appointed to that position in April 2014 to strengthen the financial literacy of Canadians. If you enjoy listening to the Personal Finance Show, please show your support by subscribing and leaving a review on iTunes. No time for a review? Just leave me a star rating. It takes only 2 seconds on iTunes. InvestWisely.ca is where you can find all the show notes and links, and of course all of my blog posts. I'd love to hear from you, so please feel free to send me an email at bo@investwisely.ca.